Hello, U.S. and Global Study kids. You are to take notes on 21-2. If you did, you will notice that this chapter and section talks about five major civil rights groups. We are in the JFK unit, and these five civil rights groups were very active during Kennedy's presidency. So it's very important that we talk about each of the five civil rights groups and also understand who they are, how they fought against segregation, and how they fought for civil rights. So let's begin. The first civil rights group that your textbook mentions under laying the groundwork is the NAACP. And as you should be able to recall, we've mentioned the NAACP before, and they stand for the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. And right here, where you see my laser pointer here, this is the logo of the NAACP. This organization was founded in 1909, so this is one of the very earliest civil rights groups in the United States. It's a very interracial group. There were 9 founders. Half of them were white, and the other half were African American. I can't remember which race had 5 and which one had 4, but the important thing to note is this was a very interracial group, and it was interracial even through the 60s during Kennedy's presidency. You can take a look at the picture here. And you could see that there are black and white members in the NAACP. You may recall that the NAACP fought segregation through the court system. So if you remember Thurgood Marshall, I have him listed here as a member of the NAACP. He is the lawyer that argued the case for Brown in Brown versus the Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas. He argued the case in front of the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court unanimously ruled in 1954 that segregated schools were unconstitutional. So that's what the NAACP did. If there was a segregation law, they would fight it through the court system. Sometimes they won, sometimes they lost. But that's what the NAACP did. They worked through the court system to try to change segregation laws. The next civil rights group that your textbook comes up with is the National Urban League. And you can see in the top corner here, this is the logo of the National Urban League. This is a picture of the members of the Detroit, Michigan National Urban League. And this is another early civil rights group. It was founded in 1911. Some sources will tell you 1910. I think actually on its website they actually say 1910, and your textbook gives you 1911. So I thought, well, I better mention the other year. They are also an interracial group. If you take a look at the picture, again, you're going to see African Americans, you're going to see whites. Now, their goal was to help not only just blacks, but immigrants. There were a lot of people moving into, especially northern cities. I don't know if you guys remember, we had talked about that great migration. And so people were showing up in the cities, they were looking for work, and they were looking for housing. So the National Urban League, that is how they try to help. They try to help people find jobs and housing. 2 of the founders were Ruth Standish Baldwin, and Dr. George Edmund Haynes. Your textbook doesn't give you that, but I did. The third civil rights group that your textbook talks about is CORE. And if you look at the logo here, CORE stands for Congress of Racial Equality, and this is CORE's logo, making equality a reality. This group was founded in 1942, so a couple decades later than the NAACP and National Urban League. They are also an interracial group. I think one of the fallacies is that civil rights groups were just, for African Americans only. This is not true. Okay, these early civil rights groups were very interracial. Pacifist guys, they're peaceful people. They don't believe in fighting to get what they want. So their goal is to bring change through peaceful confrontation. So they want equality, they want to end segregation, but they're going to try to reach equality through peaceful means. James Farmer, that's who is pictured right here, right beside the logo. This is James Farmer. He made CORE into a national organization. There was a time there when CORE's funds uh, were pretty low, and James Farmer continued to work without pay. But he was very instrumental in making CORE into a national organization. And what I mean by that is there's members of CORE all across the US. So there were CORE organizations all across the US, and CORE had members in most of the states in the United States. And they believed in peaceful confrontation. That's very important to remember. Now, the next group is the SCLC, and SCLC stands for Southern Christian Leadership Conference. And I bet you can't tell who this handsome man here is. Well, if you don't recognize him, you're going to find out real soon. It was founded in 1957 by clergymen. Now, you may wonder what a clergyman is. Basically, clergymen are preachers, pastors, reverends. You know, they're men of the cloth. They preach the Lord's word. So that is who founded the SCLC. Their goal was to bring change through nonviolent protest, very, very similar to CORE, where CORE was founded by pacifists and they believe in peaceful confrontation. The SCLC uses nonviolent protest. Hey, if that handsome man there, that is Martin Luther King Jr. He was one of the founders, so you guys should know and remember that he was a preacher down in Montgomery, Alabama during the Montgomery bus boycott. If you recall that story, we already talked about that in class and we already tested on that information. Martin Luther King Jr. was one of the founders of the SCLC. Now, he believed in the practices of Mohandas Gandhi and Henry David Thoreau. Both of these men practiced nonviolent protest. Gandhi was from India, and I don't know if you guys know, but Britain colonized India. And Gandhi used nonviolent protest to help India become an independent nation and free it from the colonial rule of Great Britain. Henry David Thoreau used a term called civil disobedience. And basically, he did not believe in violence. He was nonviolent protest, but he was willing to break the law nonviolently, guys. That's the key, and willing to go to jail for his beliefs. So Dr. King followed the teachings, these nonviolent teachings of these two men. And the SCLC used nonviolent protests, but they really tried to shift the focus of the civil rights movement to the South. Because as you guys all know, the South had laws on the book that actually segregated African Americans from whites. Remember, I showed you those signs with, colored waiting room only. They had separate restrooms, separate lunch counters, separate schools. And so they really wanted to spotlight the South and how segregated it was. And so they really wanted to bring attention to the South, and they were pretty successful in doing that. And then the last civil rights group that your textbook talks about is SNCC. Yeah, it kind of reminds me of Snickers, the candy bar, SNCC. And instead of SNCC, the short acronym there was pronounced SNCC, and it stood for Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Now, it was founded in 1960. Interracial group. So you take a look at the picture here on the lower right-hand corner, you'll see that members are African American, they're also white, but they're also made up of young people, because the goal of SNCC was to allow students to have a greater voice in the civil rights movement. The other, civil rights groups, NAACP, National Urban League, CORE, SCLC, were made up of adults. And when I'm talking about young people, I'm not talking about high school students. I'm talking about college students. And they really, they wanted to become involved and they wanted their voices heard. So they formed a civil rights group called SNCC with the help of Dr. King, because he helped them form their civil rights group. But now you have a civil rights group for young people only. And SNCC, you will find out when we continue talking about the civil rights movement during the JFK years, you're going to see that SNCC's like there all the time. In every type of protest we talk about, there's SNCC. SNCC's always there. They're very energized, they're active. And two of the members, early members of SNCC, was Ella Baker and Robert Moses. You guys will have Cornell notes to do for the next 2 days on 21-3 textbook. It's going to be on all the subtitles. And 21-4 textbook, you're only going to do 2 subtitles, Kennedy on Civil Rights and the March on Washington. Remember, this whole unit is about JFK. If you do the other subtitles in 21-4, you're going to be talking about another president. We don't want to go to President Johnson yet. That will start in January. So just do those 2 subtitles in 21-4. I promise you, I will not talk about those other subtitles for the Kennedy unit. If you guys have any questions, you can always email me.